Hello everyone, today I'm interviewing Craig Connelly, an incredibly talented trance producer from the UK. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I've just come back from the gym, just had a shower and ready for this interview.
Fantastic. Alright, so let's start at the beginning. What got you into music production initially?
Well, I think originally I've always had ideas for music, whether it be like band music or just guitar music. Music in general started for me when I was 11 playing guitar, and then I got into like electronic music when I was about 13, going to a local kind of dance music event. Now, from there, I wanted to get into DJing, so I think DJing came first because I wanted to collect the records I was hearing at the events in my town. But then I quickly kind of got a taste for, what would it be like to make my own record? And I used to be able to hear records in my head. I could hear melodies and ideas for tunes in my head. So I was like, I need to get these out. So when I was, I think it was about 16, I bought a copy of Reason. And then I just tried that, and because Reason's very like plug and play, like a lot of patching, a lot of cables, I kind of got it. It kind of looked like real instruments to me. So from there, I just kind of became addicted to it. Then I went on to do an actual music production course when I was 18. That lasted 2 years, and that's when I started to learn the software that I use these days. Kind of moved away from Reason, and then it was quite a while before I actually started releasing. But yeah, I'd say it was just a passion of like wanting to know what the records were that I could hear on the radio and how they were made. So, just playing around in my bedroom got me into producing, really.
Right, got you. That music production course, was that beneficial to you? Because I know a lot of people sort of talk down on them. They say they're a waste of money and you can learn by yourself. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I completely disagree with that. I completely disagree with it. I mean, one thing I think that people may get disappointed about, one of my friends is starting a music production course soon. And one thing I've advised to it is that the music production course won't teach you how to be creative, or it won't teach you how to write a hit or a big tune. There's no emphasis on melody, on chords, or anything like that. Like the course didn't teach me any of that. It's all technical stuff. Now, if you're coming into this, it's all right somebody saying, oh, just get a set of speakers and get a version of Live or Logic or something and just start making. But it's a daunting task. Like there's a lot of technical things to get your head around and a lot of knowledge you'll miss. I think having just an 18-month or like a 12-month course under your belt in a piece of music software you know want to use is just invaluable. Okay, they won't teach you how to make hits, but you got to learn how to use the software, and it's hard to pick that up if you just sat there with it in front of you. Like it's almost I found it nearly impossible to get my head around some of the software I was using before I started taking a course.
Yeah, totally. Good answer. So I'm listening to Decibels, which is one of your tracks. And, I have to say that the pad or string progression and the breakdown, it's fantastic, not to mention the melody. And a lot of people struggle with composition, especially when it comes to melody creation, progressions, basically the main idea of a track. How do you go about coming up with musical ideas? And do you have any advice that you would give to those people who struggle with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's one thing I like to talk about when people talk to me about production and tunes, like the creation of them, is a lot of the emphasis tends to be on other things. People don't often talk about writing riffs, writing hits, writing, things people are going to like, and things that you're going to like. I mean, a little like, I kind of like a journey for me would be, I used to make the most awful, dullest, boring music ever. And I used to like get really down because I thought, oh, it's my engineering, or there's something about my music which doesn't work. Nobody was interested in it. No labels cared. And that was like, 4 or 5 years ago. And then I started taking piano lessons. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs to go out there and learn the piano, but basic knowledge of keys, chords, how different notes kind of interact with each other is just absolutely crucial. So, I mean, I'm not a great player of the piano. I'm actually rubbish. Like if you said to me, play this song or read this sheet music, it'd take me hours to read it, just to read the sheet music. But what I gained from it was I went to the piano lesson and I said to the guy, look, like I'll pay you, 15 quid an hour or whatever it was, like it was expensive, but I want you to teach me the piano from the point of view of a songwriter. So he did a lot of something which is called reharmonizing. Now, this isn't stealing other people's music. It's just a case of listening to people's music, which you like. So like I would always listen to like a ton of Coldplay, a ton of Elbow, bands for when I was younger, even stuff like Limp Bizkit, Funeral for a Friend, Linkin Park, this like rock music which I was into, and which always had these kind of like epic chord progressions. I would listen to them and I would just mimic them on the piano. I would play them, I'd play along with them. And then as you play along with them, you stop listening to the track that's playing in the background. You're playing along with them and you just kind of like naturally find ideas of your own, like in chord sequences of your own. Like, I don't know, I don't think I did this with Decibels, but with Light Whatever, I was listening to a Kasabian album, in particular a track called Club Foot. And I was listening to that riff, and then I started to kind of jam over it, and then I just turned it off. And then within 20 minutes, half an hour, I had a completely new riff, which has nothing to do with the track, but it just kind of, that was the inspiration and spark. So coming back to your question about Decibels, that track in particular, I remember sitting there and being so happy with the string progression. I think it's probably like the best one I've probably put together, with, and that melody as well is quite prominent. But I think it was just that came at a time where I was quite kind of comfortable with the piano, the music that I was making, and kind of like the inspirations. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question directly, but
No, definitely,
I would.
definitely.
My advice would be in that area when it comes to melody creation is that it is, from a label A&R's point of view and a DJ's point of view, it is the single most important thing, and it gets overlooked so much. Too many people are too concerned with huge 140 bass lines and kit drums and these huge kind of, like how to make my track sound huge. Huge tracks aren't necessarily the ones which are the most best engineered and loudest. Like, I'm not particularly proud of, well, no, I am. I'm not like particularly like mad on the production in Black Hole. I don't think it's particularly like that tight compared to some of the stuff I'm doing now. But I'd certainly got the riff right, I think, and the chords, because it turned into quite a big record for me. So I guess it's a case of, before even committing to going into the engineering and the beat creation and the bassline creation, make sure your head's right with your melody and just completely comfortable. You think that it's just a hook. And if you want to learn how to find hooks, just listen to a lot of Coldplay, or like just pop music. I mean, Lady Gaga is an absolute songstress. She's absolutely amazing at writing. You can listen to music like that and get ideas for the hooks in the melodies. And the more you listen to that stuff, you will start to latch onto your own kind of melodies, sounds and stuff. So yeah, you'll get there if you just listen to the right inspiration, I think.
For sure, I think that's fundamentally important as well. I mean, I see a lot of new producers, especially, they put in overemphasis on the technical side of production, mixing and so on. Would you agree that that sort of exists
Yeah,
out there?
I do agree with that. No, don't get me wrong. It's not that that's not important, but you could do a pretty basic, like, I like a no frills mix down if the riff is absolutely like astonishing. And like, I mean, like I could wax lyrical about tracks which I think are huge for the last 5 or 6 years. One springs to mind where the riff just carries the record was Joachim Miller, Lost Connection. I mean, I played that 12 months ago and it still had the same impact on the dance floor as it ever has done. Now, not taking anything away from the production, but the arrangement of that track was just simple, progressive, just chugged along for a little bit for 2 or 3 minutes, like really laid back. And then in the breakdown, you've got this huge, just absolutely killer melody, which, any producer will be proud of writing. It just destroys the dance floor. So, like, I think, like, the big learn from that I always try to get across to people is, yeah, mix downs and engineering is important, but it's not quite as important as writing riffs and writing melodies. That is what's going to get you. That's the difference between not being signed and being signed.
Yeah, no, good point. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're making music, so that
Exactly.
kind of stuff
Exactly.
is totally important. Um, I heard that you're a Pro Tools user, which is very interesting. What do you like about Pro Tools?
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with it. It's a lot. Most of the time, it's a piece of shit. But like, I tend to. My problem with it is when I went to the music college, they did kind of emphasize a lot on learning how to use Pro Tools. Now, I could go to Logic or Live or Cubase, but my issue with it always is that it'll take me so long to get up to speed with those sequences
Mm.
that I would probably lose time in just producing. So rather than not like lay into Pro Tools too much, what do I like about it? The audio editing, like a lot of people, like I've classically said, it is superb in Pro Tools. Like a lot of like the shortcuts and the way you can move around an actual audio file is like second to none, really. I mean, it does blow the other audio editors out the window. People have often complained about MIDI, and I can see where they're coming from. But again, like I think it's once you've learned something really like well and proficiently, you won't really have an issue with it. I mean, I do like the mixer. It's a very like a classic way of mixing. You just get one fader per channel. There's not a whole stack of different faders. Like I know in like Cubase, there's like MIDI faders here and instrument faders there, and your instruments in different places. Like in Pro Tools, it's just a channel strip with the instrument at the top, solo and mute, and a fader with some sends. It's really simple, actually. Like it, you know, I think a lot of people think that it's more complicated than what it is, but it actually is. It is quite simple to use, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Do you use any hardware?
I do indeed, yeah. I've always been quite like a big fan of hardware. And I'm not going to sit here and preach and say that, you know, you have to use analog synths or you have to use expensive outboard compressors, because you don't. It's just a case of I've always worked in music shops for a long time in, you know, my early years, and I always was into like hardware synthesizers. I quite like the idea of, you know, moving around the instrument, you know, changing the parameters with your hands, kind of getting a real like ergonomic feel onto it, rather than just clicking away with a mouse, you know, or Massive or Omnisphere or whatever. So I've had an Access Virus C for 10 years now. Yeah, I bought it years ago, and it's always kind of found its way into my tunes somewhere. And people say, "Oh, well, you know, you don't need it." I say, "Well, I don't, but I enjoy it. You know, I enjoy the process of using the machine." I've got recently my most recent thing, which I absolutely adore, is an Electron Analog 4, which is four voices of analog synthesizer. So you got like basically four mono analog synths in one box, and it's quite a compact unit, a bit fiddly to use and to get your head round. But the sound quality is it's just superb. I mean, I've had analog synths in the past, like Dave Smith's, and although they've been good, like it sounds really like quite glitchy and quite really like raw and electronic, and takes you a long time to get it worked into a track. But this at Electron, the tone, like the actual like tonality of the waveforms is just like it's just so soulful and nice to listen to. You know, or like a lot of people say about like software synth, they sound really digital. Well, they do when you compare it to like a waveform of an analog synth, it's really just like rich and sweet to listen to. I've had Dave Smiths in the past. I've had a couple of the Mofo ranges. I've had an Innovation, one of those old KS racks. Like a lot of synths have come and gone in the studio, but I think the Virus has always stayed there, and the Electron has always stayed there. Plus, I've got like a big DigiDesign sound card, which is actually quite basic. And my monitors I use are Genelex. Monitors are always important, as is acoustic treatments in the room. I think, you know, making sure your environment you're listening to the music in is well looked after is crucial. I'm not saying like, you know, go mad and start like building like a false floor and worry about it too much, but even just like a little bit of treatment here and there to stop like splashing reflections, and, you know, be mindful of how much bass is in the environment where you're sitting is also, you know, very important.
For sure. So regarding acoustic treatment, like how did you go about doing that? Because I know that a lot of producers, you know, want to add acoustic treatment, but they're just not sure where to start.
Yeah, I mean it's a great dark art which I've spent a long time researching a lot of things that reading a lot of articles that I don't even understand, like, you know, a lot of like really scientific stuff. But I think like, you know, like, and there's also a lot of confusing information out there. Like a lot of people say, you know, you should get like the foam tiles which are like slash cut, but what a lot of people don't realize is these like one stop fix it kits are often not the best thing, because they only treat frequencies down to a certain level. Like I don't think, you know, I know for a fact those like panels and stuff, they don't really treat anything below like 300, 400, maybe
Mm.
even higher. You know, one thing to bear in mind with a room is the bass, and that's because in dance music you'll often find that if you get the kick and bass line mix working right, the other elements fall into place quite nicely. It's not to say to ignore those frequencies in the room, but what you should definitely bear in mind is how much bass is in the listening position where you're sat, and also are you sat in the right place? Because if you're sat in the wrong place in the room, the bass will just ruin your tune, and you won't be able to control it at all. So, right, how do I explain this? Where to start? I guess look at your room and then see where the sweet spot is. Just keep moving your head around until you get to the point in the room where everything sounds most natural, where there's not too much of everything. And then from there, work out where, if there is like an excessive bass coming from a certain direction, look at that area and think, what can I put in that place to stop that happening? I actually built with my dad some bass traps for really cheap. We spent like 100 quid and made 8 of these things, and they are massive. They're like 4 feet by 3 feet by about half a foot deep. And I can actually supply, if anybody wants this. I know there's a guide somewhere on the internet where you can make your own bass traps.
Okay.
And these bass traps, they're more like broadband absorbers, because they basically they just take away all the high ends and mid ends anyway, because it's like a big piece of rock wool wrapped in like a material. But then they also kind of control the bass quite well. So, I can supply a guide to that, and you can make 2 or 3 of those up and just stand them like they stand upright. Just stand them in different places in the room to make sure that they're just kind of killing some of the frequencies which are hurting the mix.
Right, awesome. Okay, let's say you sit down to work on a new track, a new project. Where do you start? Do you start with the drums or the melody, or does it change every time?
I guess going back to my earlier point about composition, it always kind of has to start with the melody for me. I don't know how, I don't know how people start with drums and bass lines and stuff. I find that really difficult. There's 2 approaches. The first thing I'll do is sometimes I'll sit down and I'll just make my intention to make drum loops which don't already exist. So I'll take other people's samples, load them into like Native Instruments Machine, remix them by cutting the loop up into slices, and that'll kind of just be a process for me of getting better at drum production, and making sure I've got like a wealth of drums that I can go to, which I've not used 1,000 times with every tune. But the main approach is to sit down with the piano, try not focus on the computer, try and focus on the music. I mean, not just a piano. I mean, I don't own a piano myself, but like with the MIDI keyboard, load a piano sound up and play around with chords which you like, so chords from like a rock song you like from when you were a kid, or like, a melody that in a trance tune that you like. Obviously not copying it exactly, but get a feel for that. And then, don't ever commit to making a tune until you've got your melody, I think, is my biggest thing I can say.
Right, got you. So you start with the piano. Do you do that so you can avoid getting stuck into sound design straight away?
Exactly.
I know some people get carried away with that. They spend too much time trying to find the perfect pitch without even having an idea or a melody.
Yeah, I mean, like, production for me is more of an evolution. It's not like I can't find, the sounds I want from the first off. I do a lot of things where I'll just kind of like, I make like a 16 or 32 bar loop. And once I've got my piano idea down, I'll then like record it really badly because I can't play into the into the computer, and then I'll get my MIDI and make sure that my MIDI roll, like all the notes in the right places, all the notes are the right lengths. Then I'll just do like what I call a mock-up. So I'll just load in a kick drum that I've used 1,000 times before, a really basic offbeat bass line, get the riff, just a super soft or massive, and then a crash cymbal and some really crappy drum loops, and just mock up a section which I can say will be the main section, and just see if it works as an idea, rather than focusing on sound design, like you've said. Does the concept of this melody work as an idea? And then once I think it does, then the kind of like the world's my oyster. I mean, I can take it in any direction. It could be like a 130 beats per minute, more like, like more progressive thing. It could be more like a darker thing, like decibels. It could then turn into something quite uplifting and euphoric, like, Black Hole. But I need to have a good understanding of what the melody is and chords are first.
Right, that's an interesting approach. I like it. Now, one thing that stands out in a lot of your tracks is the use of pads. Is there a bit of layering involved there? I mean, what plugins do you use?
Yeah, it's funny because like I'm not saying like I'm some sort of maestro, but it's not ever something I've like thought I was very strong at. But like a label actually said to me like just 12 months ago, like, you're very big on layering and there's like such a big thick layered sound. And like, I don't really think I'm like doing it consciously. I think I'm just keep working at it till it works. a couple of tips for this is what you'll find with my pads is that probably like I think like I've probably got the chords right to begin with, but I generally just have like really kind of smooth super saw pads, and then I'll add things into them which make them a bit specialer. So it's not like it's just like one pad; it is a multiple of layers. But the like some of the layers they can't sustain themselves on their own. So what people might find is like I'll suggest some like plugins in a minute, some like ideas. But if you try and put in like a real like ethereal pad with like a weird kind of like almost like haunting voice in it on its own, they'll think, oh, that doesn't work, and then just scrap it, and then they'll keep cycling presets till you find you're back into just going for a big supersaw. So what you want to do is in the section where you need a pad, make sure you've just got like a nuts and bolts saw pad which just fills up the space regardless. So then you're not got an issue of trying to fill up the space with something special. Then once you've got that in place, then you go searching for the more ethereal, evolving, weird pads. Places I look are some of the sound design banks in Omnisphere. So like some of the banks which you'd not usually gravitate towards, you know, some which are like to do with movie scores and things you'd hear in sound effects banks. And also something which nobody ever talks about, which I think is a synth which is superb, is Absinthe 5 by Native Instruments. It's an absolute hidden gem. Like some of the pad sounds in that are just so weird and just so like out there that I think people just avoid them. But like I say, if you have like a bare bones super saw pad and then mix it in with just a bit of these like weird evolving pads and textures from Absinthe, you actually get something which works together rather than, you know, trying to make the Absinthe pad work on its own.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you start with the melody and then put together a basic arrangement or idea. Do you mix as you go, or do you do a mix down at the end? After everything's arranged and composed.
Like I said before, it's more of an evolution. I do mix as I go, I guess. I think once I've got my concept down, and maybe even just use like my scrap sounds, just like my scrappy book sounds, I'll mock up an arrangement. Then I'll sit down and go, right, well, let's start with like the kick and the bass, and I mix them against each other, and I won't proceed once I've got the arrangement and the kind of the concept down. I won't proceed until the kick and bass is working really well. I learned that from somebody a long time ago, where you really do have to make sure your kick and bass is rocking, because if you don't, you'll find yourself struggling with everything else. You'll think your drums don't work, or you think your synths don't work and your leads don't work. Often they're not. If you get your bass and kit right, really work together, a really solid foundation, a lot of the stuff you need to put on top just slots quite easily. So yeah, I mean, a good example of this is, I know you had Ilan Bluestone on recently, and his kicks and bass lines are always really solid. They're not like jumping up into the other frequencies. They just kind of have their own place, like a real core foundation, and he can stick quite a lot of different elements on top, and they just kind of work. So,
Right, definitely. One thing that stands out quite often in your tracks is your bass lines. It seems you always have a different bass line with a new track. What do you do in terms of processing for them? Because they're incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I have been kind of contemplating recently a lot of my stuff. It kind of flips between one sound and the other. I think it's just got like a variety of trance sounds, really. I tend to not make the same tune twice. I'll try not to. It depends, really. Like, I tend to use a lot of like analog waveforms, really simplistic ones, as like core elements. So in decibels, for example, the bass line in that is actually just a single sawtooth wave sampled from a Dave Smith analog synth.
Okay.
Again, I'm not like advocating that you need to rush out and buy an analog synth, but I think less is more. Now, one thing to do with bass is try and just go back to the simplest waveform and keep it simple. And you've got to look at it as if like you can almost see it in your head, because your kit drum occupies a certain amount of space in that bar. And then when you've got the bass line, it's got to fit into the gaps in between. Now, you can have top basses which have not got no like actual, so should we say, bass or sub content, and they do fit on top of kit drums. But you'll always have an issue if you try and get a sub frequency mixing with the kick. Now, what I tend to do is kind of go for the simplest waveform. So it might just be like a single sawtooth wave, not even two together, just a single one, because that single sawtooth wave will make the speakers move really kind of far backwards and forwards. But if you start adding multiple waveforms on top of each other, it almost anchors onto the speaker and holds it back, the speaker cone, so you don't get that like absolute like kick and then throb of the bass. I mean, what you put on top of that, as long as they don't clash, is it shouldn't be too difficult to mix them in. But I think the core element of my bass is always getting this single waveform to sit in the gaps between the kick and the kick drums, which sounds quite. And when I say that, it sounds really simple, but I don't know. It's like it's not something I used to kind of find really easy. It's taken me quite a while, probably only until like 18, 12 months ago since I got this right. Something else I do tend to bear in mind quite a bit is a lot of compressors aren't actually that good at side chaining. I know there's plugins out there like LFO Tool, which is good for side chaining, like envelope shapers. But sometimes what you might have to just go do is just take a render of your 8 bar or 32 bar, whatever it is, bass line, and just go in and actually draw. I mean, I do this quite a bit, and just actually draw, not with the automation, the volume automation of the fader, but a lot of sequences like Pro Tools, Logic, and Cubase, you can actually draw in a line on the waveform of the actual volume curve. So you're actually envelope shaping the volume curve yourself. So like, analog synths can be quite unpredictable. So I tend to like record one note and then use that one note repetitively as the actual note in each part of the bass line. That way you get consistency. But also the same concept can be applied when you do the envelope shaping. Once you've got it right once, you can just copy that, and then it responds to the kick drum the same every time. Whereas if you got soft synth, it regenerates the waves every single time it hits the notes. I know it's digital, but it recreates them in a slightly different way every time. And then your compressor is reacting. It should do the same every time, but I tend to find they do react ever so slightly every time there's a kick drum. So having this like simple waveform with an envelope shape in it can get you just like a super solid consistent wave. And that's what I did with Decibels. It was just like I just got the waveform, made it work against the kick once, and then that made it just absolutely like just uniform against every single kick. So that way there was no clashing.
Right, got you. Okay, we'll move on to these quick fire questions. So, what's your go-to synth? Can be hardware or software.
It's actually massive by Native Instruments because it's a good one for me to just fire up. I've got a ton of presets that I can just load just to get a good concept of a tune. And if I'm struggling with a sound, like I just can't get something right, I'll go to Massive, and 9 times out of 10, there'll be an answer in there somewhere to the question. It'll just be there somewhere. I mean, that's a good one to just kind of find something you need, I think.
It's a good synth. Do you have any favorite sample libraries or sound sets?
Of course I do. Freshly squeezed samples are my favorite sample libraries. In particular, the Activa Trance Essentials. I don't think I've ever heard a trance sample library as good as the Activa Trance library. Another good one was the Rank One massive one. That was superb as well. That's just outstanding. So yeah, those two, actually two I use pretty much nearly in every tune in some way or shape or form.
Fantastic. If you had to listen to one artist on repeat for 24 hours, who would it be?
That's so hard. I mean, it'd have to be something relaxing because I don't think I could listen to trance for 24 hours. And sorry, I couldn't listen to rock music for 24 hours. There's a band called Elbow in the UK, and they have a variety of really mellow tunes, and it doesn't even get past soft rock. So I think if I had to listen to something for 24 hours, I could probably tolerate them for 24 hours. If not, maybe like Hans Zimmer. So I could just listen to some like epic film scores without, they're constantly evolving, and you don't get sick or bored of the same repetitive shit. So
what's one piece of production advice you wish you were told earlier?
Probably like the riff making and like the melody making, how important it is to get your head right when it comes to writing riffs. I mean, I learned like a lot from like piano lessons and stuff. I also learned a lot from like watching other producers produce. And I think being totally sold on your melody and chords before you even commit to anything else is probably the one thing I wish I could have gone back to myself 10 years ago when I was struggling to just produce absolute rubbish records.
Awesome. And finally, whereabouts can people find you online?
I'm actually launching a new website in the next 2 weeks, and that'll be craigconnelly.net, facebook.com/. Craig Connelly Music, soundcloud.com/ Craig Connelly Music, Twitter is Craig_Connelly, Instagram is Craig_Connelly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on, Craig. It's been a pleasure to
No
have you on
problem.
here.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I love doing stuff like this. So yeah, I'll be around to answer any more questions if people want to inbox me or something like that. So
Awesome. Cheers.